Living Transplant is a podcast that takes you behind the scenes at the transplant program at Toronto General Hospital with the goal to educate, inspire, and fuel your passion about transplant. I'm your host, Candice Coughlin. I'm thrilled to have you join me for season 5. In this episode of the Living Transplant podcast, I was joined by Winnie Jerome, a woman whose family comes first. Winnie talks to us about her journey as a living donor to her sister through the kidney pair donation program, making that decision after having a premature newborn baby at home. She spoke about how when she found out she was able to donate a kidney to a stranger so her sister would receive a kidney from a stranger, the excitement was too much to hold. We're later joined by Darlene Jagusik, a registered nurse who spent time supporting the Living and Deceased Donation Program in Saskatchewan, as well as being a critical care nurse in BC and Saskatchewan for many years. She is now the program manager for the kidney pair donation and highly sensitized patient program at Canadian Blood Services. We discuss hope for those waiting, the details and intricacies of the kidney pair donation program, and the gratitude we have for organ donors. Please enjoy. Welcome back to the Living Transplant podcast. I am absolutely thrilled to have Winnie and Darlene here with me today. Thank you both for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
So we're going to start with you, Winnie. I know you, but our listeners may not know you as well. I'm wondering if you can tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
My name is Winnie. I'm 38. I'm a mom of a almost 10-year-old boy. My goodness, does time go by so fast. Previously an educator, worked in childcare for a very long time, love children. I'm a big kid at heart, but eventually I had to prioritize where my energy went, and wrangling in a bunch of toddlers every day does put some wear and tear on your body. So decided to go with something a little bit less strenuous. So did a little bit of a career change and went into some editorial administration with the Canadian Pediatric Society. So still, supporting and advocating for children, which is very important.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can bring us back to a while back now, actually, when Audio was first diagnosed with kidney disease and you started to learn a little bit more about some of the options to treat that and what your family was thinking at that time.
It was a big learning curve for all of us. Just wrapping our brains around the fact that my sister was really sick, not just a little sick where you could put a Band-Aid on it, but something that needed immediate attention, number 1, but also, like a huge surgery. Like it's a pretty big procedure. Then came, I guess, the testing to see who would be a match. And then people came from everywhere. My sister is a very loved person in the community. And so people were really coming out of anywhere and said, like, if you need a kidney, I'll help you and whatever. And we were already kind of in the process, starting with myself and some of my family members, going through all the process. My parents initially were very worried because I hadn't had my son yet, newly married, and at the time, and my parents were like, you might have to think about your future at that point. But at that time, I think things were still kind of evolving slowly, in terms of the disease. And so there was time for dialysis to see how her body was going to react to certain things and to medication and so on. In that time, here came my beautiful 2 pound, 10 ounce baby boy, whom I had at 28 weeks and 2 days. So there was another hurdle there that my family was kind of going through at the same time. About 6 months after his birth, we realized that dialysis was kind of taking a toll on Fadia and on her on the family as a whole, but really on her body. And that's about when we started looking into the paired exchange program. We had already done tests with me where they found that I couldn't donate directly to Fadia because she had too many antibodies. And we met with a gentleman named Michael at the hospital, and I remember his face, but I wish I would get to see him again at least once just to say thank you and to say hello. He was there from the beginning to the end, kind of explaining to us what the process would be. And then came the time to kind of relay that information to, our family, to my parents, and having 2 daughters under the knife at the same time was not in the plans, right?
Yeah. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? You guys just went through a huge birth of a new baby, whether it's a premature baby or completely healthy 10-pound baby. It's a huge change, and most people feel like they're not themselves for at least a year, even some people 2 years after the birth. And then to go through having a preemie at home and probably back and forth to the hospital. I was lucky my little one was 36 weeks and she was 4 pounds. So, I mean, double the size of your little guy, right? But knowing that stress of having a premature baby and newborn and all of it, right? And then still in the back of your head, you're thinking about how do I donate to my sister? I mean, that is remarkable.
Absolutely. How do I help her out? There was nothing more, and I might tear up because it's been a while since I've had to explain at length what happened, but it was very difficult watching my sister, bounce from work to dialysis to coming home, taking care of a 2 or 3-year-old at the time. My nephew was still a toddler. She's very involved in the community, very involved in church, and so to see her still wanting to carry that lifestyle, but seeing fatigue and just, the disease kinda creeping onto her body so fast, I it was too much to watch, and I love my sister dearly, and sometimes I joke and I tell her, "I didn't really do it for you, I did it for Wes." And that there was
Yeah.
no way I would let my nephew live without a mom if I could help it, but also, I do kinda like my sister.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. Wow. Yeah. And so bringing back to your parents, I mean, my dad went through having his daughter and his mom in there at the same time, but it's different thinking about having your kids in. What were your parents thinking about when they've just been through all of this with your little baby as well? And now you're thinking about jumping into a surgery.
We've had my mom is very creative in her solution, finding. Obviously, they were trying to find a way for it to not have to happen that way, right? If there had there been any other possibilities, I'm sure we would have explored those avenues. But at that time, if they could have purchased a kidney on Amazon, I'm sure they would have, because she was just there. There's no way, like, two of her kids at the same time, and there is the surgery part of it, but also the fact that my kidney would be going to a stranger was the other aspect of things that made them not necessarily uncomfortable, but there was I guess, a piece of information missing, in terms of letting them understand that that's how the program was set up, that I would match with a stranger and that another stranger would then match with Fadia more closely.
I find a lot of times with people who are not in it, like one family member removed, that you're not hearing all that information firsthand. So sometimes it can be difficult, or even going to Dr. Google, right? And we hear so many bad things. Were there about that process and misunderstanding from your family?
Not necessarily misunderstandings, but definitely fears in terms of the recovery, both for Fadia and for myself. When it came to me, it would probably be like, what would be the long term effects, on my body, and what happens if then I get sick and something happens to my kidney, and so on and so forth. But those all of that information was discussed with me at length. Um, I got to ask all of the questions. Again, my ex-husband, my then husband, is very, very curious and was very intentional about the questions he was asking in terms of what my lifestyle could be moving forward. With Fadia being on dialysis, we saw how it changed, certain aspects of her lifestyle. There's a lot of food she was not allowed to eat, and if you know my sister, she loves food, and to restrict her from, our beloved Caribbean food, our Haitian food, it was difficult. So I'm grateful for my ex-husband to have asked those questions, like, is she okay to lift? How long until she can lift? Um, what are things to look for, in the next few months in terms of her diet, or, just those little details that in the moment, because I was so tunneled vision in terms of like, this is happening, I'm doing this with no real fear. I kind of allowed everybody else to be afraid and to get the information for me, and to kind of keep me, like, focused on what was happening. But the information is what's really important there, is going to get that information so that those fears can kind of be put to the side. Getting the right information was really important to kind of getting rid of those fears for the family.
That's amazing. And so when Michael talked to you about the paired exchange program and you decided, yes, this is what I want to do, how long did it take until you guys found out that you were going to be part of one of those chains?
It was fairly quick. Um, when we found out that we were entered, I'm gonna say less than 3 months. But the program is ran every 3 months, like something like that, or every quarter of a year, there's a program to give time for kind of the domino effect of finding a person and the other person being donated to and doing all the mismatch stuff. So just that time frame there of entering the program and then finding, like, the right match, the right pairs. I think it took us 2 rounds. So not the first round, but then the second round. That was one of the best phone calls of my life. I remember where I was, what I was wearing, what was happening. Like, out getting pizza and I get a phone call. I don't recognize the number, but always just pick up, and they're like, "Okay, so we found you a match, but you can't tell your sister yet because we have to find her a match." So I'm just those words, and I'm crying already, and I'm like, "But I'm not supposed to tell her?" I'm like, "How do I not
Oh,
know?"
goodness.
I'm
Yeah.
like, "This is impossible." And all the time, like, I'm not explaining things properly. So my ex-husband, who's with me at the time, he's looking at me like, "What is happening? You need to." So finally put it on speakerphone, and we get the information that, okay, we found a match, that my sister should hear the latest tomorrow, whether or not everything is in the clear, and then we would make the arrangements for flights and booking the times and everything. And it at that point, it kind of goes so fast, and you're so excited that we rush home, and already she could tell on my face something was wrong. And I was like, you're supposed to get a call, so let's not, get our hopes up, but this is happening. Like, we're doing this. You're gonna get better, and we'll be able to talk about this when we're old and gray. But the excitement, sorry, Michael, I had to tell her if you're listening to this. Yeah, just the excitement. It was too much to hold, and knowing how it was going to change her life and mine, really and truly. It was one of the best news.
That's amazing. What happened when Fadia got her call?
Yeah, the house was in the best mood. You couldn't tell us anything at that point. You couldn't tell us anything. It was gonna happen. She was gonna get the kidney. Things. I think my mom wasn't in the country just yet, when we found out. So we had a couple of weeks to kind of get things sorted. And at that time, we all lived together in our family home. Like I said, my sister had a toddler. I had the baby. My brother had a little girl as well. So the house was just happy. There's laughter everywhere. We're just excited and happy that this is happening finally. I was at home with a brand new baby. Then came a little bit of worry because I'm like, okay, how do we plan all this? Do I take the baby? Do I leave the baby behind? And mom to the rescue. My mom flies in. So I leave my baby with her. I fly to Calgary to have my surgery done, towards the end February, and a few days later, back to Toronto.
Wow. So it was days in Calgary and then back
Yeah,
to Toronto. That's wonderful.
definitely. We were a little bit worried because my husband at the time was just starting to work. We just had the baby. So financially, we couldn't even afford it, really and truly. Uh, though the program has reimbursement plan, um, program, it just to come up with the money right away was a little bit of a worry, but we reached out to our community and my church ended up paying for both of our tickets there and back. Uh, able to make it to Calgary and yeah, it was I didn't have to worry about anything. We even had a little bit of extra spending money to eat and take care of ourselves that way, so it was great.
That's fantastic. Wow. And how did you feel when you woke up post-surgery thinking back when you were finally able to feel conscious and remember what was going on? How did it feel to know that someone had received your kidney and was doing well?
Yeah, I think that's still the part that stays with me the most is the fact that I wonder how they're doing. Like, I want to know how they're doing. I understand the need for things to be anonymous and so on, to protect people's identity, um, because there's some crazy things that could happen in, like, just in that frame, you're playing with somebody's life, right? But, I would love to know how they're doing, if they felt healthy, at least if they felt like they got a second chance or, you know, whatever, just I wanna know how they're doing.
Well, I can tell you on behalf of all recipients that whether the kidney starts working immediately or takes a little while to work, knowing that somebody else has given a piece of themselves to save our lives is something that we will never be able to put into words, that the gratitude is so overwhelming, and I know that that person that you gave to felt the exact same way, that they woke up and thought, "I don't know who that angel out there is, but I hope they're doing well, and I hope that they know that I'm doing well."
I would love that, yeah.
How did you feel once you finally got home and, you were out of the hospital and, you were back into chaos of babies and nieces and nephews and busy, busy home with everybody?
It was great. It was great to be home, and I think one of the first things I did, though, after waking up was calling my sister, because I believe our days kinda were closely tied. So when I woke up, she had just had her surgery. Um, and so it was, I guess, a few hours after she had her surgery and she had already woken up. And so to see in her face how quickly the kidney started working, I all of us started crying, obviously, but the fact that she was awake and feeling well and she had some of our friends around at the hospital with her. And so just to see her surrounded by her friends, her family, but just to see it in her face, like, the white of her eyes was white again, and her skin had already started to clear. Her lips had kinda turned, like, darker, and they had already started to clear already, and just to be able to see in action, in live moment, what had just happened, was nothing short of a miracle, it feels, but also just one of my greatest memories. To be able to just kinda share that experience with her knowing I've got her back, she's got mine, wherever we are, even I believe 2 weeks later, my best friend was getting married, like, it was it was lots of movement, after the surgery, but to know that I had my sister with me was the greatest, yeah.
And so did you attend the wedding?
I sure did, I was her maid of honor.
Oh my goodness.
I ripped some of my stitches though, so that was not fun, but, yeah,
Was that from
I
dancing?
from
Yeah,
dancing,
of
yes.
course.
Absolutely, but it was worth it, it was worth it. I had to get it cauterized because it ripped and then it got infected, and anyways, it was not pretty, but we made it through and we learned our lesson. When things are not
Yeah.
healed, you don't move.
Right. Yes, yes. Oh, that's amazing, but what an amazing thing to get to do to go and dance after something so heavy like that, right? To just let loose and enjoy that day of 2 of your people coming together and celebrating. That's amazing.
I remember, we did another kind of panel discussion shortly after, and that's one of the questions that used to come back to me often as well. "How are you feeling?" And whatever, and I used to do this little dance to show them that, like, I'm totally fine, my body doesn't feel any different and whatever. I have since stopped make doing that dance, but, it's just remarkable to kinda just go back to regular life, um and yet still having been able to just yesterday change someone's life, so
I know there's people out there who have thought about living donation, have maybe heard a little bit about paired exchange, but not sure whether or not they would be okay with it. What would you have to say to people who were considering becoming a living donor but might be nervous about it?
the more time you take to think about it, the the scarier it's going to become. Um, I think I think I said it earlier, I think what's most important is getting the right information. Getting the right information and asking all of the questions. Never like, if this saying is true, it is extra true right now is there's no such thing as a stupid question. When you don't know, you don't know. So, I was very embarrassed, but my ex-husband had asked, after surgery or how long until she can have sex again? And I was like,
For sure.
"How? Why would you ask something like this?" But it's a valid question. What
Mhm.
is post-op gonna look like for me at home and things like that? So
For sure.
getting the information, I think that's my biggest thing. You're scared, sure, understandable because that is a major procedure, but what are you scared about, and can you find information on it and the right information on it? Try to stay off of Google, but if Google is gonna help you get to those questions to then ask your team and your professionals, then go ahead, Google and take notes and write down those questions. Writing down questions too was huge for us, because obviously we get all this information and then you leave the hospital and you're driving home for 45 minutes and then those questions. So writing those down, taking the time to kind of process all of the information that's being given to you. And yeah, just stay close to your team when it comes to finding information. And your team, not just the healthcare professionals, but the people who are helping you go through this, right? So like I said, I had my ex-husband, my best friend is a nurse. So you best believe I annoyed her.
Amazing. And one thing I didn't ask prior, once you and Fadia finally got to see each other in person for the first time post-surgery, what was that like?
It was a lot of tears. It was a lot of tears. I wanted to make it to the hospital, but she was already discharged by the time I got back because it was just a few days. She was already discharged, but, I'm gonna kinda answer that question with a memory of before her surgery. We were at church, and there was a call to the front for special prayers, and we were still waiting. I think it was in the new year, so it was a month or so before we got the call. I walk up to the front, I'm crying, and the person comes and prays with me, and they're like, "Okay, well, what is your prayer?" And I said, like, I'm tired of seeing my sister like this. Something needs to change right now." I was like, "I don't know how if this I know I'm not making a wish, like, I'm praying that this needs to happen right now." And I was crying, so my sister came up from beside me, and she gave me a hug, and somebody snapped a picture of that hug, both of us just crying and just being in that moment, and seeing her after the surgery, all I could think of was that picture. How, my prayer was answered, not only my prayer was answered, but, like, we're able to talk about this picture in such a positive way. Things could have things so many things could go wrong, and they didn't, and here we are walking on the other side of hug, just literally just months later, being able to feel that relief from all that fear and uncertainty that that hug kinda embodied. All the tears and all of that when I look back on it now, it almost looks like tears of relief. They weren't that then, but knowing that, like I said, we came out on the other side, when I look at it, I know for me, for myself, that those are tears of relief, that it happened the way it was supposed to.
Yeah. Amazing. Really grateful to get to hear your story again. And if you want to be able to see Winnie and her sister Fadia, you can check out greatactions.ca because they have their amazing photos and their video up on there as well. And it's one of our Francophone videos as well, right? So thank you so much, Winnie. It's my pleasure now to have Darlene join us from Canadian Blood Services. I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about yourself, Darlene.
Absolutely. So I'll start with my current role and then maybe I'll give you a little background. So currently I am the program manager for kidney pair donation, or, we love our acronyms in healthcare, right? The KPD program. And I also manage the highly sensitized patient registry, or the HSP program here at Canadian Blood Services. My background, so I'm a registered nurse, and I'm based out of Saskatoon here in Saskatchewan. And I spent almost 10 years working for the provincial transplant program, doing both living and deceased donation for the patients in Saskatchewan. And prior to that, I was a critical care nurse. So I've worked in both BC and Saskatchewan. So very strong nursing background and lots of passion for transplant and donation. Winnie's talk actually made me a little emotional. So
Amazing. There was so much work in patient care and advocacy and behind the scenes. So what brought you to this program now with KPD and with the highly sensitized program?
Winnie talked a lot about prayers, right? And church. And, something that's very important to me personally, I always pray that everybody who needs an organ will get an organ. I know that we can't make that happen. I don't have the ability to do that. But something that I do have the ability to do is, through this work and this advocacy. Working for the provincial transplant program, I was actually redeployed during the pandemic back to ICU. And yeah, it was very challenging times. I'm sure for everybody who was working in healthcare, and especially critical care at that time. But it changed my perspective a lot, and I thought, I want to be able to do something on a bigger level to advocate for trans. Because it was we didn't have a whole lot of information for, those on dialysis and those waiting for transplants for other organs, and those who'd had transplants, what was going to happen? It was a big question mark. And so I thought this opportunity, came across my desk and I thought, how can I say no? I get to advocate and work every day in something I'm very passionate about on a national level.
Jumping in about the kidney pair donation program, we heard Winnie talk at a high level about this program, about really often when I talk to patients, we call it the kidney swap, right? Because it kind of makes it a little bit easier to understand, right? Swapping kidneys. But can you tell me a little bit about how it works from your point of view and how it supports people who need a transplant who do not have matching donors?
Yeah, no, great questions. So, from where we sit on the KPD team, we have the privilege of working with the provincial living donor programs and the transplant programs across the country. And so they are very key. So the transplant physicians and all of the coordinators at those levels in, identifying, potential people who need kidneys and, taking those calls from people who potentially want to be living donors, both those who have someone in mind and those who just want to give a kidney and help somebody. And so we work very closely with them. Um, Within the KPD program, there's a couple of different types of donors. Maybe I'll start there. So the intended directed donor, and so that would be somebody like Winnie and Fadia. So Winnie's intention was to donate to her sister, but for medical reasons, they were found not to be a match. So they entered the program. And then there is the non-directed donors. And so those are incredibly amazing people who come forward and they say, I hear of a need and I want to help. And so they go through the very same health and safety assessment process that somebody who has a potential recipient would do. And then they enter the KPD program as a non-directed donor. And we heard Winnie mention the chains. Well, that's typically what happens as we do the swaps, right? We build chains of transplants. And so these non-directed donors are responsible for almost 80% of the transplants that were in KPD. So we could not do what we do without these non-directed.
Let's say there's 6 people who are in there, and then a non-directed donor comes in. What happens to that extra kidney? Because there would be an extra kidney at the end, right? Because there's no recipient for that non-directed donor.
Great question. And so that's part of how the whole system works, right? So not only do we have interprovincial sharing, so I know healthcare seems very provincially, based these days, but this is an incredible program because it's interprovincial. So you have access to a large pool of donors. And so when that altruistic donor comes in and starts what we call a chain of transplants, there's donor leftover. Sorry, that's terrible. There's a donor at the end of the chain. And donor will donate directly to that provincial. So the provincial transplant program that had the non-directed donor will donate directly to either their deceased donor wait list or potentially if there's a match to a highly sensitized patient. So if you are somebody on the wait list waiting for a deceased donor kidney and you get that call, I mean, that probably is like winning the lotto, right? We have a
For
live kidney
sure.
for you, right? So
Yes. So, can you explain the highly sensitized patients as well for people who may not know what that means?
So there's three what we call kind of the big, well, I refer to as the big three sensitizing events for people. And so essentially what happens is they have antibodies to a large portion of potential living and deceased donors that are out there. And so that can happen if you're a female just from pregnancy, right? Blood transfusion or previous transplants, right? Because we know unfortunately some people need more than one transplant in their lifetime. And so those people, because they have a high level of sensitization, they are very difficult to match. So back in 2014, Canadian Blood Services, along with our physician transplant advisory committees, got together and they tried to figure out how we could help these people because they're really disadvantaged on their own preventations. And so they came up with the highly sensitized patient registry. And so they did some simulations in our Canadian transplant registry. So that is our organ transplant matching system that we have. Trying to explain it simply. It's much more complicated than
Yeah.
that. But our transplanting system, so the algorithms that we ran behind the scenes to create the matches. So we did some simulations there on how we could create matches for these people using, the pan-Canadian donor approach. And so they settled on patients who have what we call a calculated panel reactive antibody. So that's a specific blood test that measures these antibodies for patients. And
Okay.
so between 95 and 100% for this test is where those patients fall. So you can imagine with those numbers, very, very challenging to match. And so out of that grew
Yes.
the highly sensitized patient registry. And sorry, I'm just going to digress for a second. So from that registry, as of the end of July of this year, we had over 1,000 kidney transplants through the HSP registry across Canada.
Wow, that's
I know, isn't
amazing.
it incredible? Yeah,
Incredible. Huge milestone.
yeah.
Congratulations.
And
Yeah,
and
that's awesome.
congratulations to all those organ donor associations and transplant programs that help make this happen.
Mhm. I'm wondering when we think about the kidney pair donation program, going back to that, when let's say it's Fadia and Winnie who walk in the office and we know that Winnie's a lovely donor and that she's healthy and she's a great potential donor, but she doesn't match Fadia. How is the kidney pair donation program broached with a potential living donor like that, who we see has gone through the workup process and they're very healthy and a good donor, but just not compatible with their recipient?
As a previous living donor coordinator, I actually kind of had that conversation with any potential donor right up front. And the
Okay.
reason I did that in kind of our introductory conversations is I would always let them know that we can go through a lot of testing. We can get to the very
Mm,
last test and find out that you're not a match. I know a lot of
right.
people, there's a lot of medical shows on TV. And so there's a lot of ideas in the public about, oh, it's a
Yes.
blood test and it's a matching. But there's, as you mentioned, it's very complex, right? And in the work that we
Yes.
do. So I always wanted my living donors to be prepared, right? At any potential
Mhm.
moment in your workup, we could consider you not a match, but please don't lose hope. There is this program called kidney paired donation, and it, I noticed with Winnie, it made me smile a bit when she was talking about giving her kidney to a stranger and having her parents wrap her mind around that. Lots of questions that we would get about that. Um, but it's an incredible program. And, if you have somebody who's willing to donate for you, I know having talked with other recipients, that's such a gift. There's so many people who are
Yes.
looking for living donors and they're not able to find them. And so you have this
For sure.
gift, and then you find out that you're not a match and you can't directly receive from. And so I always wanted them to know at the initial conversation, please know that even if you get this
Mhm.
used, there is a program we can enter, kidney pair donation, where you can still ensure that your sister or brother or whoever you want to donate on behalf of can still receive a kidney. So as I mentioned with the highly sensitized patients, Canadian Blood Services operates the Canadian Transplant Registry, and so that's a very large database. So we would put in specific information that we for the donors, and then also for the potential transplant candidates. We put in information there, and we have all sorts of filters. If you're looking for a specific age match or a function or things like that as a transplant candidate,
Mhm.
which I won't go into because I'm sure I'll bore everyone. Uh, but then we run this incredibly sophisticated algorithm. We
Right.
have an algorithm architect that works at CBS who is brilliant. And so through our computer systems, we run these algorithms. And the more people in the pool, the better, the more
Right.
matches we can
Yeah.
create. So we mix those non-directed donors with the incompatible pairs. Sometimes compatible pairs will come into uh, KPD these days as well. So, for example, if you have a grandparent that wants to donate to their grandchild, but perhaps there's a few years between them,
Right.
and they're
Okay.
just looking for a better age match for their grandchild, they will enter KPD to make a match and swap kidneys. So, the more people in the pool, the more matches or transplants that we're able to create. As Winnie said, the big match cycles happen 3 times a year. So we do October, February, and June. However, we will do monthly match cycles. So as you can imagine with logistics, sometimes the health of a recipient, we know these people wait a very long time on dialysis. So sometimes they have blips in their health where they need to just pause in KPD. And so we have what we call a collapse chain. So everybody goes into the pool, and then that month we'll rerun and create new matches for them. So I know for some people, it can seem like a really long process. I'm very happy to hear that Winnie felt it was very quick. We always try and work with our programs to be as efficiently as possible to get everyone a kidney as quick as we can.
It's quite remarkable. Now, I've had some interesting questions from patients who have asked about the ethics behind kidney pair donation, about a stranger giving to me. What if my sister donates to a stranger and then the last minute the stranger pulls out and decides not to donate? Will the whole chain collapse and what will happen to everyone? And there's a lot of these fears that come about that. But then also, I'm sure that there were a lot of roundtable discussions about the ethics behind kidney pair donation before we said, okay, let's hit the start button. How did Canadian Blood Services come to a place where they felt this really is an incredible program and beneficial for patients? So let's move forward with it.
Kind of putting on my living donor coordinator hat again. A lot of the living donors I met are very much like Winnie, very incredibly committed, very humble people. who have someone that they genuinely, essentially, they want to save their life, right? By donating a kidney. And, when you have someone in your life that you care about like that, you will do anything to help. Right? We're both moms, right? We get that. Anything for my kid. Um, and I found, through my years that donors are very, very committed people. They also go through, like, everybody thinks of the traditional health testing as well, but there's also psychological screening that happens for donors as well. Not just to identify their motivations and their commitment, but also to have a plan to support them after the donation. If things don't go well, or if something happens to your recipient, we want to make sure that these people are supported afterwards as well. In my experience, I would say most donors are 100% committed. I mean, Winnie mentioned, actually, I was gonna add this in. Winnie mentioned having to travel for her surgery. We don't actually do that anymore. We ship the kidneys now. So donors don't have to worry about, financial expense and, all those things that you shouldn't have to worry about while you're giving this amazing gift. And so we shipped the kidney. But I think back to that was very common. Like, we just expected the donors to go to a different city and a different surgical team, a hospital they've never been to. So these people who are giving this amazing gift would go through all of that. They get in a plane, a train, or a car, and they'd go somewhere completely unknown to them and have this major
Yeah.
surgery to donate a kidney to a
Right.
stranger. Like, how incredible is that,
Wild.
right? Like
Yeah.
that.
Away from all of your family and your care team. And
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
some people depending, well, again, speaking from my experience, I had a few donors who couldn't afford to take support people with them. And so they're on their own in these cities, essentially, so I always found that amazing. Also from the Canadian Blood Services perspective. So we do have rules in place for matching and logistics and how we support our programs. And there have been, I'm sure, people listening to this will have seen in the news, there have been instances where um, I don't believe it's just from a donor changing their mind, but we know that that is an option, right? Donors are given that choice right up until pretty much they roll through the OR, that they can change their mind at any time about the donation. But sometimes it comes down to donor health, where they also themselves, something is found that they're no longer able to donate. And so we have in KPD what we call an unpaired candidate. And so that is a transplant candidate whose donor wasn't able to proceed. So there is policies and procedures in place for the kidney pair donation program. We've had a handful of those in the history. So this is going back to 2009 when the program started. And all of those patients have received their kidneys. We can't always guarantee how long. I think for one patient, it took almost a year, which is probably very scary for them. But we do have procedures in place to ensure those people will receive a transplant through the program.
That's great. Yeah. I'm also wondering, I get to meet a lot of people through the work that I do and doing that photo shoot with Canadian Blood Services for our Great Actions. All of the paired exchange program people who spoke, it was so interesting to hear their different perspectives. And some of them had waited a really long time on the list because of their high antibodies and things like that, that were so positive about the experience. I'm wondering if there is a story or a couple things that really motivate you, or, a specific pairing that you think about often that has happened in the past.
I'm gonna try not to get emotional. I used to get very attached to my patients. They're very incredible people. But one thing we're always looking for with the registry, so both KPD and HSP, is, the evolution, right? Like, our goal is to maximize transplants as much as we can for people. And so, we work with the amazing physicians across the country to keep that evolution going. But, I think back and again, the donor commitment. And so years and years ago, I had a donor who was in a paired donation chain, and I believe they were also paired with a transplant candidate that had high antibodies. And so it was
Wow.
quite a few match cycles that they went through. in order to make that match. So we did. It was great. That was one of, I know people talk about they love hearing it. I loved making those calls, like I got to make
Yeah.
that call and say, hey, got a
Oh my
match for you.
goodness.
It was incredible. Things don't always go smoothly, right? And so, there was some additional testing that the donor had to go through and, some complications and things. And nonetheless, they remained committed. And we got to the OR date and something happened to their recipient after they'd traveled to the city. So they ended up having to come all the way back home. And
Mhm.
again, we were okay. We rescheduled the surgery. That donor remained committed and went back and donated. And
Wow.
that story will always stick with me. That commitment that it takes to do something like that. Um,
For sure.
because with kidney pair donation too, you think of donating to a stranger, but really we couldn't make the transplants that we make without one donor in the pool.
Right.
This October, we just had one of our biggest match cycles on record. So we created 56 transplants. One
Wow.
donor, helps us to create 56 transplants. So it's not just like you're giving one person their chance. You're
Right.
giving us the ability to create all of those transplants. I don't know how much of that, I mean, obviously there's like um, confidentiality, but just that's kind of the messaging that we're trying to send from CBS, right? It's not just your sister's life you changed, Winnie. All of those people in that trans cycle that you were in, you made a difference for all of them.
Yeah, and what I always say is it's not just those people who received either, right? It's their families and their communities. Once we're transplanted, most of us, we feel healthy again. And so we go back to work and we're able to be with our community. Some of us have children post transplant. I have a 3.5-year-old and my kidneys transplant's 15 years old, right? So all of these amazing things that we're able to do because these donors decided to step forward. And there's people in the world now who wouldn't have existed if it weren't for living donors, right? So that's just a really cool thing to think about. I'm wondering if you know what the longest chain ever was.
The longest chain that we built or the longest chain that was successful through transplant. They're two different numbers.
Oh, okay, interesting. If you know them both, yeah, let's hear about them.
So for logistics, we actually put a cap in the algorithm, typically at 6 pairs. Just imagine
Interesting.
transporting a kidney coast to coast, right? Like it is a lot of
Right.
work for our programs. But if we have patients in the pool, this could be their only match. There is built into the algorithm a flag that will allow us to build the chain bigger. So in my time with Canadian Blood Services, I've seen a chain up to 8 pairs. It was huge. Uh, but
Wow.
typically our chains go up to about 6 pairs.
Yeah, and again, like that ripple effect, 12 people who are in surgery within a couple days and 12 kidneys and 12 families that are impacted by that. That's incredible.
I know I just, when you stop for a second to think about, so that's like 12 ORs across the country, and that's your surgical staff and your recovery staff, and like it just the amount of people who help to make this happen is incredible.
And so you mentioned too that you have the ability to make that call to tell somebody either you are a match for someone else or we have found a match for you. What does that feel like when you're able to call somebody and give them that news?
I don't honestly know that there's words. As a previous living donor coordinator, even for our directed pairs, right? It seems for living donors, I know things are changing and testing is getting expedited for donors and they're doing things like 1-day clinics. But back in my day, it could be almost 6 months, a year before it finish their workup. And so even for a directed donation to make that call and say, hey, we have an OR date for you. Like, let's get you prepped. Like, tears, squeals of joy, like the gamut of emotions. I got to be a part of these moments. It's really incredible. Like, yeah, there aren't really words to describe what it's like in that moment. I used to call it the breakup from my office because you become so
Oh, yes.
these donors, and then all of a sudden they donate, and then they
Right.
leave you,
Yeah.
you know?
Right.
You don't see them anymore.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so you get very involved in their story and advocating for them, and they're very incredible people.
Mhm. Yeah. It's funny, I had a surgeon one time tell me, "There's only 2 reasons why you would ever want somebody to come to the hospital, and one is to have a baby, of course, and the other one is to have a transplant." And he said, "The fact that I get to be one of the good reasons why somebody is in the hospital just motivates me to keep going and to do this hard work." Because, of course, not all of transplants work. Not all of this, we could get to the even the surgery room, like you said, and something could go wrong and could be postponed. But majority of the time, because we do such extensive workups on both recipient and donor, it does work. And I have a friend who has had his kidney for over 40 years. I mean, it's amazing to know these people or even people who have been off dialysis for 2 years. It's just like Winnie talked about, it's not an easy life to live on dialysis. When the opportunity comes that somebody's willing to go through this process to give us that gift of life, it's remarkable, and it's pretty cool that you guys have figured out a way to match people who not only don't know each other and are complete strangers, but that actually physically can donate to one another and they'll never know each other. That is just it seems like a Hallmark movie, to be honest. It doesn't seem realistic sometimes, right?
Yeah. I really feel that way now that, we put their kidney in a box and we ship it across the country too. It seems like someone should definitely make a movie about this.
Yes, exactly. And so I have to ask, what does the Canadian Blood Services kidney pair donation shipping box of a kidney actually look like? Is it a cooler? Does it say human organ
It
on it?
does. Yeah. I was going to say I have one around here because I measure them quite often when I need to order them, but I don't have it within camera shot.
That's
It does. Yeah.
amazing.
So that is similar to what you would see on TV, the red cooler box that says, yeah, human
Yeah.
organ on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So I'm wondering if you could talk to me a little bit more about that highly sensitized program and how many people are often put on that program. Is it very common for people to be highly sensitized, or is it more of a smaller group than the average patient?
Oh, that the registry fluctuates, with numbers depending on when we can get people matched. So, typically, those patients who have that calculated panel reactive body level 95 to 98, usually within a year and a half-ish, according to some of our data, we can find them a match, sometimes faster. There are times actually in that registry where the 95% category, we have 0 waiting on registry list at all. There are periods in time for that, so that's great. Where it gets a little challenging and kinda leading me back to the evolution is when we're looking at 99 to 100%. So they typically do unfortunately wait, quite long. They both have access to KPD and HSP. So KPD if they have a living donor or donors, because you can have more than one donor
Right.
if you want to enter KPD as well. Um,
Oh, really?
yes, yes, sometimes it's advantageous for those who are highly sensitized, to have different donors of different blood groups. Because with KPD, not only do we match the transplant candidate, but we match the donor as well. So yeah,
Right.
so it does help if you have more than one donor, to help us create a match sometimes. But yeah, those 99 to 100%, unfortunately, they seem to wait for quite a few years, on the wait list. But as I mentioned, we're always looking at things to, see what we can do to try and find them a match. So there's some new programs actually coming to Canadian Blood Services in December for the deceased donor wait list, and then February for KPD, to try and help those hardest to match on the wait list.
What I just hear when you're talking is just there's a lot of hope for people, that there's more options opening up and people working really hard to help people to find kidneys. And so I'm wondering before we go, I'll ask this as a two-parter. Number one, tell the donors that are part of your kidney paired exchange program, and then maybe something you would like to leave with those people who are waiting for an organ?
To the donors, past and present, for the kidney pair donation program, and, those who I was able to work with in past years, first, I would say thank you. It's a privilege and an honor to really to work with those people and to help them on their journey to change someone's life. It truly is. And we are very lucky, I feel personally, in Canadian transplantation. We have an incredible amount of talent and passion in this country for living donation and transplant. I feel like we're very lucky. They are amazing, and I can't do what I do without. And for transplant candidates, I every once in a while I I still get lucky in this job to make a connection.
Right.
When I'm invited to the ACB summit or something like that, to make a connection with people who are on the list and waiting. And I think you kind of captured it before. There is hope, right? So again, we have incredibly talented people in Canada, and they're very passionate, and we're always looking for new ways to find transplants for patients and create matches. So, if you're somebody who's been on the wait list for a long time, hang in there.
And so, if people who are listening wanted to learn more about the Canadian Blood Services Kidney Pair Donation Program, where would they go to?
Excellent. We have a living organ donor page. So it's at blood.ca under the tab of organs and tissues. So there's lots of cool quizzes on there as well now. So if you are curious, oh, I have had cancer 10 years ago. Could I be a donor? All of those types of questions are on there in quiz format. So you can go on and find more about living kidney donation. And also, there are connections to every provincial transplant program on there. So you can find the email address if that's applicable to your provincial transplant program, or the telephone number to contact them directly and learn more about living donation.
Perfect. That's amazing. Thank you so much. I always love to tell people if you can't be a living donor, then register your consent at beadonor.ca. And while you're waiting, think about donating blood as well. There's all different ways to help people, right? You can also look into all of that at blood.ca.
And one thing I always say too, right? Not everybody will be able to be a living organ donor, but I think something that I always try to focus my living donor patients on is advocacy. So if you're for whatever reason not able to donate an organ to someone you love, as both you and Winnie mentioned, you have someone you care about on dialysis and they're exhausted and they probably have so many other things to do. They might not be able to advocate for themselves to find another living donor. Um, so I know UHN, as well as we do, has great information on advocating to find a living donor. So that would be one thing I'd love to say to your listeners as well. If you can't donate, there's always the advocacy to find living donors for some.
Amazing. You're speaking my language.
Yeah, I
That's
love it.
incredible. Thank you so much, Darlene.
Thanks, Winnie. Thanks, Candace. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Living Transplant Podcast. If you did, please leave us a review and share with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to Living Transplant wherever you are listening today. If you have any ideas for podcast episodes, you can reach out to us at livingorgandonation@uhn.ca or on social at GiveLifeUHN. For more information about living organ donation, you can visit us at www.livingorgandonation.ca. Special thanks to Lead Podcasting for editing this episode and for production support. I'm your host, Candace Coughlin. Thanks for spending your time with us.